What's more dangerous, a terrorist in a cave planning global attacks, or a respected scientist working quietly in a government lab? One had followers, the other had access. Both used fear as a weapon, and neither needed a bomb to change the world. This isn't just a story about anthrax. It's a story about trust, betrayal, and how terror can wear a lab coat.
Before we continue, make sure to like and subscribe. It really helps us a lot. Thank you.
In the fall of 2001, just weeks after the world watched smoke rise from the ruins of the Twin Towers, a new kind of terror arrived in silence. It didn't come through airplanes or explosions, but through the US mail system. A fine white powder, sealed inside ordinary business envelopes, was sent to newsrooms and senators. The contents? Bacillus anthracis, anthrax. 5 people died. 17 were hospitalized. Hundreds of thousands feared they might be next. Mailrooms shut down. Government buildings were evacuated. The entire country looked at every letter with suspicion. And the most chilling part? No one knew who was behind it. No name, no organization, just the unmistakable message that safety had a new enemy, and it could be anywhere. While investigators scrambled for clues, another name began surfacing, one that had nothing to do with laboratories or microscopes, yet had long been on the radar of intelligence agencies. Ayman al-Zawahiri. He wasn't a microbiologist. He wasn't even in the United States. But as the ideological mastermind behind al-Qaeda, he had already begun pursuing anthrax, not just as a biological agent, but as a psychological weapon. 2 men, 2 very different paths. One was a respected American scientist, a vaccine developer working inside a US Army lab. The other was a radical Egyptian doctor, orchestrating terror from caves in Afghanistan. One mailed letters with deadly spores. The other planned to unleash them on a scale never seen before. And both believed in the same terrifying idea, that fear could be engineered, refined, and distributed like any other weapon. This story isn't just about what they did. It's about how 2 individuals, working worlds apart, came to see the invisible as more powerful than the explosive. One had access, the other had ambition. Together, they introduced a new era of warfare, one defined not by the number of bodies, but by the reach of panic. In the next part, we'll step inside their minds, unpacking their methods, their motives, and how 2 seemingly opposite figures each turned biology into a tool of control. Bruce Ivins spent most of his life in white coats and sterile labs. He wasn't a fugitive or an outsider. He was a government scientist, employed by the US Army Medical Research Institute of Infectious Diseases. For years, he worked on developing and improving vaccines against anthrax. He had high-level security clearance and daily access to some of the deadliest pathogens in the world. To colleagues, he was intelligent, eccentric, sometimes difficult, but certainly not a killer. But something shifted in the months before the anthrax attacks. Lab logs showed that Ivins began spending unusually long hours alone in the lab, particularly in the evenings and weekends, times when no one else was around. He accessed a specific sample, RMR-1029, a highly purified strain of anthrax spores, later identified as the same used in the attacks. The material was weaponized into an extremely fine powder, small enough to float in the air and enter the lungs. It wasn't just anthrax, it was anthrax prepared for maximum lethality. What pushed him to do it? According to psychiatric evaluations and internal FBI profiles, Ivins was battling intense psychological distress. He had a history of depression, obsessive behaviors, and delusional thinking. Some close to him later recalled erratic shifts in mood and cryptic emails. But the suspected motive wasn't purely madness. Investigators believe Ivins was driven by a twisted logic. create a threat to elevate the need for the very vaccine he helped develop. In his mind, the attacks would validate his work, place him at the center of the national response, and finally give him the recognition he felt he deserved. Thousands of miles away, in vastly different conditions, Ayman al-Zawahiri had a motive of his own. As the second in command of al-Qaeda, and later its leader, Zawahiri wasn't just planning attacks. He was crafting a long-term vision. He saw bioweapons as the next evolution of asymmetric warfare, invisible, untraceable, and capable of sowing panic far beyond the reach of conventional explosives. He didn't need to know the science himself. He had people for that. By the late 1990s, al-Qaeda had begun assembling a rudimentary biological weapons program. Zawahiri recruited a Malaysian microbiologist, Yazid Sufat, who had studied in the US, and tasked him with producing weaponized anthrax. In Kandahar, Afghanistan, the group set up a lab with second-hand equipment and limited materials. It wasn't state-of-the-art, but it was enough to begin trials. Documents found after the US invasion included handwritten notes on anthrax cultivation, contamination procedures, and the use of aerosol dispersal methods. Though the lab was shut down before a full-scale attack could be launched, the intent was unmistakable and deeply alarming. Where Ivins worked alone, Zawahiri operated as a strategist, a delegator. His goal wasn't personal recognition, it was ideological victory. He wasn't trying to scare a few senators. He wanted to collapse faith in Western systems. Healthcare, security, governance. Biological warfare to him wasn't a side tactic. It was part of the doctrine, a poor man's nuclear bomb. And yet, both men shared something fundamental. They recognized that fear, once seeded, grows fast and wide. Neither needed mass casualties to achieve their goals. A few deaths, the right headlines, and the hint of an unseen threat could shift public behavior, government policy, and even global priorities. One man weaponized a pathogen for validation, the other for revolution, but both relied on the same psychological truth. When people no longer trust the air they breathe or the paper they touch, terror doesn't need to strike again. It already has. In the next section, we'll place their actions side by side, not just to weigh the damage done, but to calculate what was truly at stake: lives, systems, and the invisible cost of uncertainty. Bruce Ivins killed 5 people. That's the official number. But the effect of his actions went far beyond the bodies. In a matter of days, his anthrax-laced letters forced the evacuation of the Hart Senate office building, shut down portions of the U.S. Postal Service, and sparked a national biosecurity panic. More than 30,000 people were given antibiotics as a precaution. Entire mail facilities were sterilized using chlorine dioxide gas, and the cleanup alone cost the U.S. government over $1 billion. For weeks, people were afraid to touch their own mail. For months, the idea of invisible death traveled faster than any postal truck, and it all came from less than 10 grams of refined spores. The substance itself was invisible to the naked eye, but its consequences were impossible to ignore. Schools updated emergency protocols, hospitals conducted drills, Congress fast-tracked funding for biodefense programs, launching initiatives that would eventually pour billions into laboratory infrastructure, sensor networks, and rapid response units. Ivins hadn't just weaponized a biological agent, he'd changed the way a country thought. Ayman al-Zawahiri, on the other hand, never succeeded in launching a biological attack. His lab in Kandahar was discovered and dismantled before it could produce a viable product. His scientist, Yazid Sufat, was captured. No anthrax from that program ever reached a target, but that doesn't mean he failed. The psychological and strategic impact of his ambitions triggered a ripple effect through the global security apparatus. In the early 2000s, just the discovery of al-Qaeda's biological program prompted over 200 security policy revisions across NATO member states. The U.S. Department of Homeland Security significantly increased funding for its BioWatch and Project BioShield programs. International summits began placing biological warfare at the top of their threat assessment lists, alongside cyber attacks and nuclear proliferation. All of that was driven not by action, but by intention. Zawahiri had proven that the mere pursuit of bioweapons could destabilize governments, budgets, and borders. Here's what makes the comparison so unnerving. One man acted, the other planned. One succeeded in a deadly attack, the other in altering strategy. And yet, both outcomes resulted in systemic change. Ivins exposed how a lone actor could infiltrate and manipulate a national defense framework from within. Zawahiri showed how a stateless terrorist could push global security systems to adapt, invest, and harden, even without a successful strike. Measured in conventional terms, death tolls, material damage, arrests, Ivins' impact was immediate and traceable. Zawahiri's was diffuse, but arguably longer-lasting. Ivins infected bodies. Zawahiri infected doctrines. When we talk about biological threats, we often think in numbers, fatalities, grams of toxin, square miles quarantined. But the real danger, in both cases, lay in what couldn't be measured: fear, doubt, the slow erosion of trust. Trust in mail, trust in science, trust in the systems meant to protect us. And that's what sets biological terror apart. The weapon isn't just the pathogen, it's the uncertainty that follows, the questions that don't have answers, the policies that change not because something happened, but because something might. In the final part, we'll bring it all together. Two men, two ideologies, and the question they both leave behind. In an age where fear moves faster than disease, what kind of defense can ever be enough? Long after Bruce Ivins took his own life in 2008, just as the FBI closed in, his legacy remained. Not in accolades or patents, but in protocols, in reinforced laboratory security, in background checks tightened across every level of government research, in the lingering skepticism toward even the most trusted institutions. He had proven something terrifying, that it only takes one person on the inside to compromise an entire national system. The most dangerous breach didn't come from an enemy infiltrating the perimeter. It came from within the perimeter itself. His attack wasn't a grand spectacle. There were no televised explosions, no demands issued to the press. Yet it sparked one of the most expensive and exhaustive federal investigations in U.S. history. 7 years of inquiry, over 600,000 lab hours, hundreds of interviews, and in the end, no trial, only a name and a void left by suicide. Bruce Ivins died without confessing, but the weight of evidence against him shifted the landscape forever. He didn't need to destroy a city to prove his point. He only needed the world to feel that it could happen again, anytime, anywhere. Ayman al-Zawahiri, in contrast, outlived most of his contemporaries. While many of al-Qaeda's top figures were killed or captured in the early 2000s, Zawahiri remained a symbol of enduring threat. His ideology evolved, adapted, and extended far beyond any one location. The biological weapons program he initiated never bore fruit in the tactical sense, but it planted seeds in the strategic realm, seeds that grew into doctrine, fear, and readiness. Even as drone strikes dismantled the remnants of al-Qaeda's infrastructure, Zawahiri's influence lingered in policy and imagination. He had succeeded in reframing the battlefield, not just as a physical space, but as a psychological one, a space where uncertainty could be cultivated and weaponized, where fear could be made to spread just as easily as a virus. What ties these two men together is not their background, ideology, or method, but their understanding of fear. Both saw clearly that in a connected world, it isn't just the act that matters, it's the idea, the suggestion, the implied threat. Ivins didn't need a manifesto. Zawahiri didn't need a functioning lab. They understood that modern terror doesn't always need a climax. Sometimes the mere hint is enough. And that leaves a lingering question. How do you prepare for a threat that doesn't announce itself? How do you secure a society not just from bombs and bullets, but from envelopes, whispers, intentions? In the years since these stories unfolded, the world has seen pandemics, cyber attacks, and the rise of new extremist ideologies. Each time the lesson is the same. Vulnerability isn't always visible, and preparedness isn't just about equipment or surveillance. It's about imagination, about understanding that the next major attack may not come with noise, but with silence, not through armies, but through individuals, not with destruction, but with doubt. Bruce Ivins' weaponized access, Ayman al-Zawahiri weaponized ideology, both changed the world, not by how many they killed, but by how many began to question the air they breathed, the systems they trusted, and the future they once believed was safe. Their stories aren't about the past. They're about the ongoing challenge of defending against threats that don't look like threats, until it's too late. And that's why, even now, the real danger they represent still lingers, not in the labs they worked in, not in the compounds they built, but in the silence they left behind. 2 men, 2 missions, 1 terrifying truth. You don't need an army to shake a nation. You just need the right moment and the right method. Ivins showed us that horror can come from inside the system. Zawahiri proved that the idea of fear is sometimes more powerful than the act itself. If you found this story thought-provoking, hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. We dig deep into the darkest corners of real-world crimes and the minds behind them. And here's the question we want you to debate in the comments. Who is more dangerous, the man who acted or the man who planned? Let us know what you think.